class. Today we are looking at an essay by the author Benjamin Ghasemi. The essay was published in 2019 and is titled Trophy Hunting and Conservation: Do the Major Ethical Theories Converge in Opposition to Trophy Hunting? And Ghasemi is a postdoctorate fellow at CSU here in Colorado, interestingly enough. And to be sure, trophy hunting is controversial, and back in 2015, there was the infamous case of the American dentist who somehow lured a male lion named Cecil from a restricted zone in Zimbabwe, then to get killed by the dentist by bow and arrow. And obviously, the dentist was a big game trophy hunter. His name is Walter Palmer. And he paid a Zimbabwean hunter guide to kill Cecil $50,000. And Cecil's body was skinned and the head was removed later the next day as a trophy. And so this case brought about outrage from conservation groups on either side of the debate, not just in protest, but also from pro-trophy hunting enthusiasts. So trophy hunting is a specific type of hunting that's recreational and done in the name of acquisition of non-human body parts as a symbol of conquest, memorial, or otherwise. This is to be distinguished from the types of hunting for survival, subsistence culling, and so forth. And so this type of hunting, Ghasemi indicates, is not practiced always in the name of recreation or the sport of it. And so oftentimes the goal is to obtain a trophy or symbol of success and victory of the hunt. And so there is, of course, a line of argumentation whereby the hunters are hunting in the name of conservation. So what are the few of the arguments in favor of trophy hunting as pro-environmentally enacted in the name of conservation? Question mark. So number one, perhaps this is a way to cull the population of, say, deer who put a toll on the environment if not controlled in some way. And so types of controlled hunting could be practiced to fund anti-poaching measures, bringing about stricter control of the hunted. Two, there also is an argument that the allowance of trophy hunting could also contribute to land habitat conservation, and such effects to promote the trophy hunter could also bring about funding to conservation and habitat restoration and conservation. And this could also be a way of staving off the growth of human development. Number three, and settlements of lands for hunting safaris that are preserved and reserved and the like. And so we'll see which of these Ghasemi focuses on with regard to a few of the normative theories that we studied earlier this semester, with direct reference to Ghasemi's second chapter, Towards Ethical Convergence in Trophy Hunting Policy. So we're brought to further clarity in terms of our ethical practice, recalling that this is a way of determining whether or not we should or should not do something. And for Ghasemi, we divide the problem with moral values on one side and policy implications on the other. With morality, we're turning attention to what's right or wrong. to do in terms of policy implications. So the question is, what ought to be done in the name of trophy hunting? And so sometimes a one size fits all solution is not always the answer, which is a way in which Ghasemi refers to Brian Norton. And so Brian Norton is a professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology, teaching environmental policy from a pragmatic approach, whereby a practical emphasis on the environment is prioritized by distinguishing between what we see in terms of convergence and consensus. So, Mr. Norton is a practical philosopher, or a philosopher who is practicing in a way that we're seeing these points on convergence and consensus, whereby we see a tendency toward consensus, whereby we'll see a tendency toward consensus implies total agreement between morality and policy, whereas when we're looking at a convergence, we agree that the two sides need not reach 100% consensus. Rather, a difference in moral agreement does not always entail full agreement in terms of policy. And so here for Norton, we have a sense of what he terms a convergence hypothesis. And so this is understood as environmental holism and anthropocentrism. So in other words, looking at the way in which environmental holism, or a way in which we're seeing the environment as a whole, in a convergence with anthropocentrism. Okay? And so this point of convergence is the practical framework utilized by Ghasemi to examine the ethics of trophy hunting by way of classical utilitarianism, also deontology, and from a virtue ethics vantage, to essentially counter a claim that trophy hunting is a viably ethical practice. So now to his utilitarian analysis of trophy hunting. So as we learned by way of J.S. Mill and Jeremy Bentham, a utilitarian places the value of morality on the consequences of an action that bring about the greatest aggregate of happiness for the most amount of people and sentient beings, in this case animals. And so we're also extend this obviously to animal welfare, because Bentham was notably an animal rights activist as well, including reference to Bentham's consideration for the suffering of animals, obviously. And Ghasemi does something we do not, or did not, while studying classical utilitarianism, whereby we'll divide our understanding of utilitarianism in half to distinguish between act and rule utilitarianism. So as far as we need to conceptualize the difference, it is often said that Bentham was an act utilitarian, whereby an act utilitarian determines the value of the consequences in singular actions, more or less in a case-by-case basis, and always in the name of favoring a majority of people, the most amount of people. So the famous trolley problem is brought in by Philippa Foot as a critique of act utilitarianism, procedures and practices, interestingly enough. And on the other hand, we have what we call a rule utilitarian, of whom is more affiliated with J.S. Mill. So this is a utilitarian perspective favored by Ghasemi due to the reasoning that the act and practices of trophy hunting have more to do with the implementation of rules and guidelines with respect to policy. So again, rule utilitarianism. This is the way in which Ghasemi is assessing his perspective, his position on trophy hunting in relation to rule utilitarianism. So we understand the rule utilitarian as one who sees the value of setting rules to determine the consequences of an action that benefits the most amount of people and or animals in the environment. And likewise, we'll, with Ghasemi, acknowledge that the core of a utilitarian's actions are still based on consequences and circumstances. These are always, even for a rule utilitarian, empirical. In other words, based on empirical outcomes, consequences, etc. And first, what are the utilitarian arguments in favor of trophy hunting? Ghasemi highlights the argument that providing an opportunity for trophy hunters is a way to encourage conservation of land and thus also providing economic benefits for the surrounding communities. In other words, the benefits of allowing and, of course, charging fees to permit trophy hunting brings about the greatest amount of good for the environment at large, as well as providing jobs and interest for local communities. This is, of course, at the expense of the small amount of trophy animals targeted by the hunter. So thus the minority of animals is small in comparison to the large benefit brought about by the wide range of those affected, extending to the consistency of groups and like in terms of the communities, so on and so forth. And to contest the arguments of rule utilitarians, Ghasemi also utilizes the IUCN principles surrounding trophy hunting. So the IUCN stands for International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And these guidelines were provided by the IUCN, having to do with the limitations of trophy hunting if the practice serves as a way that, having to do with the limitations of trophy hunting if the practice serves as a contribution to the declining population, ecosystem functioning, and the like. So in other words, trophy hunting practices should not limit or diminish the biodiversity of an ecosystem. In the literature researched by Ghasemi, he sees that the removal of social elders of social mammals, as with whales, elephants, decreases the social knowledge of such creatures, given that the older creatures often symbolize the higher trophy status for the hunter. So in rural Tanzania, lion and leopard trophy hunting has resulted in higher infanticide rates by male dominant replacements. So there is also consequential problems of diversity brought about by the practice of trophy breeding, wildlife farming, and the like, which of course disturbs the diversity of the structure of wildlife communities. So trophy hunting for certain type of phenotypic its observable physical characteristics, likewise decreases such characteristics in the rest of the population, as with the trophy hunting of bighorn rams in North America, bighorn ram sheep in North America. And for the IUCN, there are also guidelines for the practices of trophy hunting in relation to the contributions the practice brings about beneficially in terms of conservation for the communities in close proximity to big game reserves. Such practices should be transparent and in respect with local cultural values and practices, and of course, these practices should be free of corruption, which in Ghasemi's research, the economic benefits is to a lot of African countries, the economic benefits to a lot of African countries is not as significant as one might imagine in terms of revenue brought about by the practice. And so this too is coupled with widespread problems of corruption, which also curtails possible help to the larger whole of the communities affected. So in Nigeria, South Africa, and Cameroon, the preservation and trophy hunting land also encroaches on farmland and pushes away local farmers and local agricultural practices that further estrange the community. So involvement with the land and animals, thus in plenty of cases, such as preserves, also enhances the old colonial divisions. And so that usually alienate poor people in the name of the land owning minority of people. So there is a case for the ways in which the utilitarian assesses the ethical practice of trophy hunting, specifically in light of a rule utilitarian application. So this first application has to do with the problem of the extra suffering brought about for the animals, their painful deaths, and we'll take this to mean that for Ghasemi, we're as rule utilitarians seeing that a rule should be in place so as to ensure a decrease in suffering for the most amount of animals is the basic logic behind this, thus exposing a strong affiliation with negative utilitarianism. And likewise, likewise, the happiness for the most amount of people in a classical sense also should be a rule in terms of limiting and curtailing negligible benefits trophy hunters bring to the community at large, and by extension, the minimal aid brought to conservation efforts. So for a rule utilitarian, the practice should not be favored due to the resentment brought about that decreases trust in already struggling goodwill efforts to conserve the land ethically. So if for a rule utilitarian the practice of trophy hunting were to continue for Ghasemi, it would have to have a few rules we take into consideration. So A, the practice of trophy hunting must not imperil wildlife communities, natural selection, and the ecosystem. B, there must be equitable conservation efforts made available to the community. C, trophy hunting must not bring about inequity and injustice. D, any animal suffering must be taken into account and also decreased. And E, the practice should never undermine undermine conservation efforts. So, as Ghasemi indicates, meeting these rule utilitarian guidelines is a formidable task for trophy hunters and hence exposes the immoral value of trophy hunting for the larger whole going forward, according to Ghasemi. So then, with regard to deontological ethics, there is a premium on individual rights and universal adherence to rules and duties. Deontology is absolutist, and there are things that should never be permitted universally. There are cases where deontologists argue in favor of hunting, yet usually only for subsistence, not for trophy hunting. Usually, trophy hunting is analyzed in a non utilitarian context, and all we have to recall is the first version of Kant's categorical imperative, whereby we could ask if I can will the action or maxim in the pursuit of trophy hunting to be a universal law, and if I do not find contradiction to that, it is permitted. If I do, then I shouldn't do it. And so it does not seem all that feasible that everyone should be allowed to trophy hunt universally. And so, yet the question here remains, should anyone who has the money and resources to trophy hunt be allowed to do it lawfully and carefully? Question mark. And so then, in terms of virtue ethics, or a virtue ethics approach, there is a premium placed on our character, and our character traits that are honed with the practice in the name of habitually doing the right thing, and likewise the aim to flourish in our lives in the name of the good, i.e., by way of eudaimonia. And so, if our moral virtue is practiced in the way that we looked at with Aristotle, with the aim of living a good life, for the sake of being good, such an aim is also a contribution to the enhancement of good relations with others in my community. So virtue ethics is always communal, to the larger whole. And this is, of course, should extend to our relations with animals and our environments, of course. And there, as Ghasemi indicates, virtue ethicists who advocate the value of the virtues of hunting in terms of educational value, enhancing the virtues of humility, can, of humility and gratitude and respect. Yet trophy hunting is usually excluded from such virtuous hunting. So the question is, can trophy hunting be a way to establish and enhance virtue? So what we just pointed out is that there are the virtues of hunting, but yet there's a distinction to be made in relation to just hunting in general that could bring about virtues of humility, gratitude, and respect, yet trophy hunting is usually excluded from so-called virtuous hunting. So the question, can trophy hunting be a way to establish and enhance virtue? So for Ghasemi, there's an analysis that shows that in the context, the literature of trophy hunting, magazines and the like, social media, so on and so forth, animals and animal body parts are usually highly objectified and often emblems and mementos to show off and display and embellish the prowess and likewise ego of the trophy hunter. So this leads Ghasemi to the conclusion that the practice, in terms of contributing to a flourishing life of virtue, is dubious at best. So it is a matter of vice in this case. And so, as an excess or a privation of virtue, in light of Aristotle's virtue ethics. So there's an open question as to the undesirable character accompanying trophy hunting maleficence uh, um, toward non human creatures. Basic cruelty to animals, lacking empathy, basic brutality, and i.e., the actions that are excessive or deficient in regard to virtue, as we looked at with the principle of the golden mean. And so, looking to Ghasemi's subchapter on the ethical convergence of trophy hunting, he basically reviews what we just laid down, and obviously he doesn't advocate the practice of trophy hunting, but also concludes that there is a shift in terms of our evaluation of ethical attitude toward animals, which is clearly a drawing away from traditional views of our dominance of nature and the ways in which we traditionally view nature and animals as purely instrumental. And so, in other words, it's that convergence of a way in which we're respecting nature as intrinsically valuable in relation to a way in which we're thinking of the anthropocentric viewpoint. In other words, that we are a part of nature as well. And so, looking at how it is that those points are converging in terms of the problem of trophy hunting for Ghasemi. So, thank you for your time, and we'll continue to cover more of this in class. So, have a good one, and talk to you later.